Then we will start with 2-minute introduction. This is an opportunity for you to say why you're running, state your qualifications, and state some major issues that are part of your campaign. And we will alternate the first person answering. And as we did with the sheriff's race earlier, if there seems to be some variation of answers, we'll certainly allow a 30-second additional response time to each candidate. You don't have to take it, but it'll just be offered to you. So we'll start with Sylvia Hackle, and you'll have 2 minutes and to introduce yourself as opening remarks. And so please take the floor.
Thank you. My name is Sylvia Hackle, and I want to be your Laramie County District Attorney. I've lived in Laramie County for 63 years and practiced law here for 42 years. My legal practice has focused on criminal law for 22 years, both as a prosecutor through the Attorney General's office and in the public defender program. Also, I have a great deal of management experience and a master's degree in public administration, and I have had leadership roles in the Attorney General's office, the public defender's office, also court-appointed special advocates, and in the private sector. I'm running for this office because, as we know, there's been some struggle in the last couple of years, and it needs an experienced candidate with expertise in management to turn the office around and let it become the premier district attorney's office in the state. I will do this through communication with our stakeholders and through consistent and competent and open leadership. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Mr. Callison, 2 minutes to open.
I'm Tom Callison. I would like to be the Laramie County District Attorney for several reasons. One is I have a wealth of experience, as does Sylvia, in criminal prosecution and or defense. I've worked for the Colorado Attorney General 6 years. I was town attorney for Encampment, Wyoming for several years. I ran my own law practice for many years. And like I said, I have a wealth of experience in the criminal matters. I have more experience in administrative prosecutions. I've done companion administrative and criminal cases with my job with the Attorney General's office. In private practice, it has been limited to defense of primarily healthcare practitioners. However, many other types of cases, from vehicular homicide on down to drunk driving and trespass. I think the district attorney's office needs to be a very high functioning office. I think it needs to have a very healthy work environment. I would like to think that people that work under me would be wanting to come to work every day, wanting to work as a prosecutor, wanting to work in a healthy environment. And I would like to have that reputation for providing that healthy environment to work. I think you could ask any of my former employers or employees about me. They would probably say the same. They would say I have an excellent work ethic. I'm very committed to my work, and I run a very healthy work environment. I have lived in Laramie County for going on 5 years. I have only practiced law full-time here for a little over a year. I've worked for legal aid for the past year and better. I recently left that job. I did a little bit of traveling, did a little hospital time before that, and I'm back at home and ready to kick off an active campaign. And thank you, Sylvia. Thanks for having us.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we will rotate. The question will start with Mr. Callison. And I'm going to combine the first two questions that the league handed out. We talked about the strengths and opportunities for improvement. So I'm going to combine those into one question, give you 2 minutes. What are the strengths? What are the opportunities for improvement in the DA's office? And just toss it out there. What's the first thing you would do if you got elected?
First thing I would do? Well, I can't really disagree with anything that Sylvia said. The first thing I would do is try to fully staff the attorneys in that office. I understand it's dramatically understaffed at the moment. And I would like to see a full staff of attorneys and no backlog of criminal cases whatsoever. I would like to see a full staff of staff assistants, technical support, administrative support, victim advocate, victim witness support, and investigative support. And backing up a moment, can I ask you to rephrase the question, please?
Well, sure. And you
Yeah.
know, thinking about the strengths of the office and the weaknesses, which would be the things you would probably address your most urgent attention to, but there are strengths as well, if you could mention those.
Good. Yeah, it was the strength part of that I was forgetting. The strength is working with the community and directly with law enforcement. As Sylvia indicated, there has been some challenges over there. I happen to get along very well with the current district attorney. I have run a men's sober house in this community for 3.5 years. I quit doing so a year ago. It became a lot to do with practicing law, and I could no longer do it. I think we really need to improve relations with the law enforcement end of this community, the sheriff's office, the police department, and the highway patrol. I would like to work very effectively with those organizations. I think communication is key and major. And I would like to address I've come to understand that 80% of all crime in this community is committed by transients. That really needs to be addressed. That's a big one. Another big one, and I happen to have firsthand knowledge of this out of running this Oxford house here in Cheyenne for 3.5 years. There is a tremendous meth epidemic in this town, and that needs to be addressed because many of the crimes start with meth use, and there is just a tremendous problem in this town that needs to be addressed both by law enforcement and by the district attorney's office. One of the questions was, and I might get ahead of myself just a little bit, but I think it needs to be addressed, is do I believe the treatment courts do exist, or that there should be treatment courts in this community? And there really should be treatment courts in this community.
Okay, so you have the stop sign, but we'll get to that. We'll get to be able to expand on that a little bit. Meanwhile, Ms. Hackle, so strengths and areas that need improvement, and what would you, if you can, what would be the first thing you did if you got elected?
In terms of strengths of the current DA's office, I think it has to be the dedicated and conscientious staff. Mr. Callison's absolutely right. They're very understaffed. Their budget allows for 22 staff people with a little over $4 million, and my understanding is they're running about 10. So obviously you can't run an office on only half your staff. That would be one of the first things to address, would be to restaff the office appropriately with the various professionals that are required to be there. The attorneys, the paralegals, investigators, victim witness coordinator, office manager, fiscal officer. It takes a whole team to run that office. And I believe that we have a core of people that can get us down the path on the right foot. Reestablishing communications with law enforcement and the courts is critical. And so the first thing I would do would be to look closely at the caseload, at the staff, and then begin, and actually I would do this after the election, but before taking office, meet with people like the chief, the sheriff, and say, tell me your experiences, what would you like to have fixed? And I know I'm missing a question. Which one am I missing?
No, well, no, it was just the strengths, weaknesses, and what would be your first order of business. That was the question. So
and that would be it, is making sure that I had a firm hand on what's there and what needs to be there.
Okay, so we will go ahead and start with Ms. Hackle again, and a lot of these questions pertain to the fact that not only is the district attorney the chief prosecutor, but also is an administrator for an office, and that dual role. Here's a question. What types of tasks would you typically delegate to associates versus those tasks you would personally perform? And you know, you might need only about 1.5 minutes for this one. So delegate versus do it yourself.
I would like to get the staff to the point I can delegate things doing with the fiscal operations of the office and office management, managing the caseload, assigning cases as they come in, that sort of thing. Something that I absolutely believe is the district attorney's personal responsibility is anything to do with human resources, with personnel. You know, is an attorney struggling? Do we need to set up some training? What sorts of things need to be done to ensure that the staff is supported, has what they need to do their job, and also that they know. I had a former employee say, Sylvia, you're the only person I know that can simultaneously pat me on the back for a job well done and then give me a slight little nudge in the rear to get me going. And so that is exclusively my role. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Callison, what type of tasks would you typically delegate to associates versus those which you would do yourself?
Number one, like Sylvia, I would delegate all administrative tasks to the staff. I would delegate the investigative functions to the staff, the technical functions, computer, things like that, things I'm not well versed in. I probably would be a large part of case assignment. There is obviously a ton of misdemeanors in this town and quite a few felonies as well. The most experienced prosecutors need to be doing the felonies. I would like to try a case now and then. First and foremost, though, I think the office needs to be run well. It needs to run effectively. It needs to address the crime, obviously, and public safety is a very big one. I had people come to me and say they're afraid to go in the parking garages downtown at night. I've had people come to me and say they're afraid to walk west of the primary downtown area over and especially Snyder. That really needs to be addressed. Again, most of the crime here is committed by transients and homeless, and that has to be addressed both with law enforcement and by way of the district attorney's office. I want people in this town to feel safe everywhere they go, from their homes to their workplace, to walking to and from their cars. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And let's see, we will start this time with Mr. Callison. There's a question about the experiences you would bring to the office, specifically in handling criminal cases. What is, if you could just sort of say what your background, what your pertinent experience is in handling criminal cases, and the other, and both of you touched briefly on it in your introduction, but maybe really your experience in criminal cases and any other professional experience that really you could bring to this office.
I have 6 years as a prosecutor with the Colorado Attorney General's office. Most of the primary load of that was administrative cases, physicians before the medical board, nurses, pharmacists, dentists, chiropractors, even outfitters. I worked with the DAs in those cases when there were companion criminal cases. Like I said, I was licensed, well, I have 34 years experience in the legal field. I was licensed in Colorado in 1988, began working immediately. In fact, I worked as I was studying for the bar exam. I took the bar exam in 1989, passed it, and became licensed here. I was town attorney for Encampment, Wyoming, like I said, for many years. I don't think I could find a person with more experience than myself. I believe Sylvia's practiced law for 6 or 8 years longer than me. I have a very high regard for Sylvia. She was one of the team of 3 that hired me in the Attorney General's office as an intern in 1987. If that answers the question sufficiently, I've seen the criminal side of matters from both the prosecution and the defense side.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hackle, your experience handling criminal cases and any other experience that you would bring to the office.
Thank you. I began my career as a trial level public defender. And in fact, 3 days after I was sworn into the bar, I was in Cody, Wyoming, working with my boss, trying a triple homicide death penalty case. So I started right with one of the most difficult kinds of cases you can prosecute. I then did everything from misdemeanors through felonies for several years. And then I started doing appeals in front of the Wyoming Supreme Court. My appellate work drew the attention of the Attorney General's office, and they lured me away where I continued to do appellate work representing the state of Wyoming and also special prosecutions for different counties, everything from driving the wrong way down a one-way street in Lusk, all the way to, again, death penalty cases. One of the cases I worked on went all the way to the United States Supreme Court, and that was quite an experience to be there in the United States Supreme Court. So I have a total of 22 years doing criminal work that focuses on criminal law. In addition, during those 22 years, I was a manager in both the Attorney General's office and I ran the State Public Defender program at the request of Governor Jim Geringer. I have a master's in public administration, and that gave me the technical tools. And then I learned by experience how to manage a large law office with statewide reach. So I believe I'm the only candidate with the management experience necessary to address the concerns that are currently facing this district attorney's office. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go off script just a little bit here, but based on Mr. Callison has mentioned a couple of times the extremely high rate of crime by transients, and I guess I will just ask, you know, and if you can sort of expand on the data to support that. But is there, to both of you, an area of crime or an emphasis on prosecution that you think needs a special emphasis that you would bring to the office? And we will start with Ms. Hackle, and I guess you know, is our previous district attorney had her emphasis she brought and used that as sort of a campaign issue, and I'm wondering if you would like to put a spotlight on any particular criminal problem in Laramie County, whether you would put a lot of resources into one particular area of prosecution and investigation at this time, and then we'll have Mr. Callison address the transient issue afterwards.
I certainly know that there are a lot of businesses in West Cheyenne and up Westland Road where owners have come to me and said, I'm very tired of the theft. I'm tired of the drug paraphernalia that's on my property every morning. And they have stated that they believe this is the result of a transient population. I don't have statistics to support that one way or the other. I frankly think that it's a little premature for me to say this should be the focus of the prosecutions of the DA's office until we get it fully staffed. And we have a huge backlog, an absolutely huge backlog. And that has to be addressed to bring justice to those whose cases have been waiting in the system for maybe 2 or 3 or 4 years. There are warrants that haven't been served. There are cases that haven't been filed. We have to get that up to date so that we know really what is going on, because the police may see one thing out in the field and be arresting, say, transients for property crimes, but our caseload may show us a lot of domestic violence, something like that. So I don't have a specific answer, but I know that the data from the cases will help us determine what way to go, as we're working with the sheriff and the police chief. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Callison, what particular focus or urgency do you see the DA's office approaching? And I guess that since you have mentioned transient a couple of times, what brought that to your attention? What kind of data do you have to show that it is that unanswered or unresponded to need?
Like Sylvia, I don't have data to back that up. It's what I've read in the newspapers, what I've discussed with law enforcement in this town, what little bit I have discussed. That's a big one. And it is what I have witnessed for myself and heard from business owners, as Sylvia has heard. It's obviously a big problem. I think it all starts with communication with law enforcement. They're the guys and the women on the street. They're the ones making arrests. They're the ones deciding on making an arrest. And they're the ones that see the crime, see the results of the crime firsthand. We're simply the prosecutors of that crime. And to some extent, the decider of which cases will be prosecuted and which will not. It all starts and ends with law enforcement. It all starts and ends with communication with law enforcement. and with having a very healthy relationship with all three areas of law enforcement in this community.
Okay, thank you. And we'll start with you, Mr. Callison, mentioning about competence of in the community and the law enforcement. So let's just maybe jump to that question. What steps would you take to regain the confidence of the public, of law enforcement, of business owners, of everyone, but sort of everyone, not just focusing on one particular sector? What steps would you take to regain overall confidence in the office? I guess that presumes you think there is an erosion of confidence right now. If so, say so, and what you would do to fix it.
Well, I don't know so much that there's erosion of confidence in there. Of course, we've all read the newspapers, et cetera. I don't have any erosion of competence with regard to law enforcement. I think they're doing a fine job in this community. I do think that good communications need to occur. I do think that law enforcement needs to support the district attorney's office. And I do think that the district attorney's office needs to support law enforcement. I would speak with the chiefs of each department, the sheriff, the police chief, and the head of the highway patrol in this community. I would also talk with my victim advocate there. As I have mentioned, and as I have experienced, there is a tremendous drug problem in this community. That is not being adequately addressed, in my opinion. I would discuss with law enforcement what division or departments within each agency is focused on that. I would discuss with law enforcement what their approach is. My approach would be treatment first. Treatment first for those addicted and with those having substance abuse and or alcohol problems. As when it comes to the dealers, there would be no discussion of a plea bargain. I would ask for the sentence that the statute allows for. Much of the time, the maximum, although it certainly would be case dependent. I am a big believer in domestic violence eradication, if at all possible. It can never be completely eradicated, but it needs to be the most rewarding case I ever did was a doctor that was a serial sex offender with his patients. And when I got that decision from the administrative law judge, I just cried. I won every count. That's not so much a boast on me. That is a credit to my witnesses in case preparation.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hackle. Do you think confidence has eroded, and if so, how would you regain the confidence of the public, law enforcement, business community in your office?
Yes, I think unfortunately confidence in the DA's office has eroded. As Mr. Callison mentioned, a lot of us have read a lot in the newspaper. And even when you take it with a grain of salt, I think that there have been concerns expressed to me, certainly from members of the public. The way that you deal with an erosion of confidence is that you communicate. You say what you mean what you say. And if you say you're going to do ABC, you better do ABC and not XYZ, unless you explain why you've changed your approach. I have talked with some law enforcement already. Obviously, the leadership of the Sheriff's Department is still pending this election, but I have been given information that they would like a more open working relationship. And so that would be my focus. If you talk to anybody who's worked with me in the past, they'll say, Sylvia is very straightforward, says what she means, and will follow through on what she says. And so that will be my focus.
Okay, thank you. And so we will start now with Ms. Hackle. And again, just going a little bit off script. Some of the controversy, again, talking about the headlines in the paper, was the decisions on charging by the prosecutor, by the DA's office. And I guess let's just quickly just touch on charging discretion. Is there a role for considerations of mental health issues in charging, or if the elements are there, you go for it? How would you handle decisions on charging criminal suspected criminals.
Thank you. Obviously, a district attorney has great discretion in deciding what charges to bring and what those charges are. When I teach for the university, I always ask my students who's the most important, powerful person in the courtroom. They always say the judge. And I say, yes, the judge is very powerful, but it's the DA who decides what's going to end up in that courtroom. So discretion is important. It's also important to remember the special responsibilities of a prosecutor under the rules of professional conduct for the practice of law, and you have to do justice as well as be an advocate. So there is discretion. I think you do have to take into account the mental status of a defendant, and there are ways to get a professional opinion on that. I think what you don't do is just leave a case hanging and unaddressed with either the law enforcement who brought the case to you or the victims. And there are only certain things you can say, again, under the rules and under statute in Wyoming that provide for privilege and confidentiality. But you say what you can so that the people feel they know what's going on. That's so important. Thank you.
Okay. Mr. Callison, discretion in charging suspected criminals. How do you see your office handling those sort of delicate balancing issues?
Sylvia makes some very good points there. She addresses some very good concerns. Ultimately, that decision falls on the district attorney. I would communicate with those assistant district attorneys under my command. I would also communicate directly with the arresting officers and those in law enforcement that have a direct hand in that particular case. I would consider a person's criminal history when charging, and considering their mental state, their mental well-being is extremely important. I have seen that addiction plays such a major role in crime in this community. I have firsthand experience with that. I think many times treatment has to be the first option. I think if someone is not receptive to treatment, or if they have failed it quite a few times, then we don't have any choice left but to incarcerate and hope and order, if we can, request the judge to order that they receive addiction therapy treatment, alcohol therapy treatment while incarcerated. Did I fully answer that? I got
well.
Yeah.
And it's so highly hypothetical. I just wanted to get your sense of how that discretion should be exercised, and what what you would look to guide your decision. As we all know, there's a danger of overcharging and a danger of undercharging and inappropriate charging. So there is a lot of discretion. I just wanted to get a sense of how you would handle that decision.
Thank you so much, Marguerite, because you've provided a good explanation for that. I think communication is key. Sylvia points that out with communication. I also think that we have a budget, and I think that we have to operate within that budget. I think the district attorneys here are probably underpaid, and I would like to work with the county commissioners, the people that fund the district attorney's office. And if we need more money, ask for more money, but be prepared to fully explain why we need more money.
Ms. Hackle, would you like to take another 30 seconds or so to add on to your response? Or
if I may address one thing that Mr. Callison just brought up, and the DA is a state office, and so we have the joy of dealing with the Joint Appropriations Committee. And I spoke to Governor Gordon at a recent campaign event, and I said, I'll be coming to talk to you about budget. And he just kind of grinned, and he said, well, you got to go through the process. I said, I know that, sir, but you also know that the DA's office needs some rebuilding. So, that we're only convincing the county commissioners, but it is the Joint Appropriations Committee, and they also do the review of the Natrona County District Attorney's office. So, it's important to know that we've got the state as a stakeholder in this as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And
Marguerite?
yeah.
There are a couple of public questions.
Oh, okay.
Questions I could ask. Also, I wasn't sure if you remembered if we were going to do a poll on this
Oh,
one at some point.
That's true. That's true. So, okay, well, I'll turn the reins over briefly to our Zoom master to ask the question. And then we will begin with Mr. Callison. I'm sorry, we'll begin with Ms. Hackle on this next one. And go ahead, Lori, and go ahead and ask a question.
Okay, so this attendee says thank you both for today. It says, given that there is only one elected position, but a huge shortage in the attorney's office, what are each other's thoughts on hiring one another to help fill those empty positions? And what are your opponent's strengths and weaknesses?
Okay, so Ms. Hackle, you want to go ahead and get started on that?
Sure. Frankly, Mr. Callison and I have spoken, and because of the number of vacancies in the office, we did talk about whether utilizing each other's strengths would be appropriate after the election. It is certainly something I am willing to consider were I to be the successful candidate. What was the other half of the question, if I may ask?
Lori?
No problem. It was long, and I think we have lost Mr.
Yeah, I was just,
Wilson.
yeah.
He may have accidentally dropped off briefly. The second part is, what are your opponent's strengths and weaknesses?
Yes, thank you. Well, I think Mr. Callison's strengths are his variety of experiences in the legal field, and also his personal challenges and how he has approached them to return to the practice of law and move forward confidently. Weaknesses are a lack of management experience in the public sector and not a lot, if any, prosecutions in what I will call the more pure criminal area of burglaries, robberies, crimes against people. Those are the kinds of crimes that the DA sees, not the administrative sorts of cases that I know he has handled a lot of. So that would be my response. Thank you.
And do we have Tom back yet?
I don't see him, so maybe we could go ahead and maybe do the poll now and hope that he will be able to return.
That sounds good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. You will see the question that will come up on the screen, and it just says, do you understand what the district attorney office does? And this will be a multiple choice question. So you can say, yes, very clear. Yes, somewhat aware, not very clear about the duties, and no idea what they do. So all of our attendees are encouraged to please participate in this poll. And you should be able to see that on your screen.
Yes, yeah, we see it. And unfortunately, the candidates themselves cannot participate. Of course, you all know what the DA does, so.
I'm still not seeing Mr. Collison unless there is a phone number here that ends in 0430. Is that him by any chance? Oh, he's back. Okay.
And Lori, it looks like you will have to be the one. Oh, you've got him back now. Looks good. Thank you.
We are at 81% participation at in our poll. A couple more attendees would be great. Just please answer the poll question if you can.
Sorry about that.
No problem.
We're doing a poll now, Mr. Collison, so
No
gave us a little
problem.
room, get you back.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. Okay. We're waiting on the poll.
Yes.
That's,
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So we have are ending the poll, and I will show you those results right now. So I think we have a very educated level of attendees here. So most people are very clear about the duties of the district attorney, and no one had no idea what they do. So
well, good.
that's very good.
And, I think the question we'll get to is one that actually Mr. Collison kind of touched on earlier, the question we had about, do you see a benefit in treatment courts? And I will go ahead and assume you do see a benefit. So I'll just say a question is, how is the best way to?
Marguerite,
Yes.
he actually still needed to answer the question.
Right.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's
Thank you.
what I was gonna say. He
Yeah.
needs
Thanks,
to answer
Sylvia.
that one.
Thank you.
Yeah, we have
Okay,
the-
so
all right.
Lori, why
I
don't you
can
ask it?
repeat that. Yeah, I'll
Yeah,
repeat that question.
thank you.
Okay, so Mr. Collison, so it says, given that there is only one elected position, but a huge shortage in the attorney's office, what are each other's thoughts on hiring one another to help fill those empty positions? And then the second part of this question is, what are your opponent's strengths and weaknesses?
So was the first part of the question, what are my thoughts as to hiring my opponent if I were to win? Did I understand that?
Yes, something along those lines, like since there are so many empty positions,
Mhm.
do you have thoughts about hiring your opponent? And then what are your opponent's strengths and weaknesses?
I'd love to hire her. We had this discussion, 2 or 3 weeks ago. I think she'd be a great addition to the district attorney's office. She has more management experience than I do. I think I have equal or more people experience than Sylvia has. Sylvia's an impressive, she's a very worthy opponent in this election, and I respect her. If she were elected, I probably would very seriously consider working for her. I think that office needs experienced attorneys. I think they could benefit from Sylvia's presence, and I think they could benefit from my presence. I'd like Sylvia working for me, but I'd also work for her if she were elected. And then the second part of that question again was, I got a little sidetracked when
That's all right. I believe you answered some of that, your
Yeah.
opponent's strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah, okay.
Okay.
Would you like another public question, Marguerite, or do you want to ask your question?
Well, yeah, let's go ahead and take another one. I was going to ask what is the benefit of treatment courts, but let's go ahead and do another. We have a little time. If you could pose and then what we will start with Mr. Callison.
Treatment courts serve a needed and very necessary purpose in this community and in all communities. I think there is a scourge of drug addiction in this country, and there's a lot of alcoholism. A couple years ago, I read a very compelling story in the Denver Post about a judge there that was in charge of the treatment courts. He was on the streets as an addict at one time. Thereafter, and I don't know the sequence of events, he either went to law school or applied to the state of Colorado to become an attorney. And he worked as an attorney a while, and he was promoted to a district judge in Denver and ran the treatment courts there. And I couldn't think of somebody better to run those treatment courts. I don't know that I could find anybody better than myself to run those, to run the DA's office relative to treatment courts. And I think there are 2 very strong judges that run the treatment courts, the DUI court and the drug treatment court. And they are Sean Chambers and Miss Williams, Antoinette Williams. And they're both very good judges, and they both take their jobs very seriously. Finally, I worked for Foundations Drug and Counseling here while I was waiting, while I applied for my law license in Wyoming, and while I was waiting for my law license. So I've seen addiction firsthand, have a great amount of experience with it. And I think that needs to be seriously addressed. It's the root of most crime, not only in this community, but everywhere.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hackle, if you could address the best use for treatment courts, and then we'll take another question from the public, and I think that will wrap up our questions for tonight. So treatment courts, how is the best way to use those?
Well, I certainly believe in treatment courts. I watched their operation many times over the years, and they bring a sense of accountability and immediacy of that accountability to the offender who is appearing in front of that judge. And I think what happens is the judge gets an excellent understanding of that individual. And if that person's having problems with meeting this or that requirement, it makes the treatment relevant and hopefully moves the offender towards successful completion of the court. So I think it definitely should be a tool in both the judges and the prosecutor's toolkit. And I think many defendants and their attorneys welcome that as an opportunity. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. And now I think Lori is going to ask a question that's submitted by the public.
Yeah, this question is just generally, if elected, would you support a law enforcement case review board? Some people believe that these law review boards can increase the quality of investigations and standardized practices. So do you have any thoughts about a law enforcement case review board?
And we'll start with Ms. Hackle.
To be honest, it's not a topic I have thought about. I think such a board could be beneficial. We have to keep in mind the size of our community, the fact we have 2 principal law enforcement agencies, and how it would be structured. And I think properly structured, it could be beneficial, but otherwise there could be some overreaching. So we have to look and really seriously evaluate how we're going to do it and what we want to address. If you don't know the end of your journey before you start it, you never get there. So we have to have a clear goal in mind. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Callison, review board.
Yeah, I think Sylvia answered that candidly and quite effectively. I will say on my own behalf, I would like to work in the district attorney's office and get a feel for the law enforcement agencies, a better feel than what I currently have. And I have worked with law enforcement agencies here relative to the Oxford house that I managed. I worked with many law enforcement agencies in the past. I guess I would be better. Well, number one, I don't have experience with case review boards for law enforcement. I'd like to see the job that the law enforcement is doing. I think they're doing a pretty good job in this community. I don't know a lot about law review boards. I think that first I'd like to be in a position of a deputy or assistant district attorney and or the district attorney and get a feel for how law enforcement is really doing in this community, a better feel than I've had, which is a pretty good exposure to it.
All right,
Okay.
Marguerite, we actually do have another question
Okay.
for the candidates that an attendee had asked. The attendee was wondering if either of the candidates have ever been subject to attorney discipline by a state bar, and if so, if they could please explain.
Okay, and that'll start with Mr. Collison.
Well, I have a wealth of experience in that area, both as counsel to attorneys suffering disciplinary proceedings and myself, and I have made no secret of my addictive past. I had a terrible addiction in Colorado 14 and 13 years ago. I was disciplined by the Office of Attorney Regulation Counsel, a branch of the Supreme Court. I welcomed that discipline. I agreed to it. I stipulated to all the facts. I had an addiction that interfered with my ability to practice law. And I lived in eternal regret for that. I sought a lot of help. I have quite a few years now of sobriety under my belt. I understand addiction. I think that perhaps is a strength in my qualifications for this office. I've also seen attorney discipline cases that I've been involved with, involving much more than discipline, involving all types of attorney misconduct. I didn't engage in attorney misconduct, but for my what was brought on by my addiction, which I readily admitted and addressed, and have to this date overcome quite successfully. I manage, like I said, the Oxford House in this community. I sit on 2 boards of lawyers' assistants, Colorado Lawyers Helping Lawyers. I've been on that board for 6.5 years. And I was asked by the state bar toward the end of last year to sit on the committee of directors for the Wyoming Lawyers, LAP, Lawyers Assistance Program. So yeah, the answer to that is yes. And I gladly disclose that.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Hackle.
Thank you, Ms. Herman, and thank you, Mr. Collison, for your very candid response. I've had no disciplinary proceedings. I've had inmates threaten to bring them against me, but none have ever appeared. Like Mr. Collison, I, in the Attorney General's office, did handle some attorney disciplinary proceedings when the AG was involved in those. So that's my experience with those disciplinary proceedings. Thank you.
Okay,
So
thank,
one final question, Marguerite.
okay, sure.
This is to both candidates. What do you think is an appropriate relationship between the district attorney's office and the press? And does that differ depending on whether it's in regard to a pending case or not?
Okay, we'll start with Ms. Hackle on that. So maybe you can do a brief review on confidentiality and limits of that, but the proper relationship between DA and the news media.
Well, the district attorney must always remember that the rules of professional conduct provide that except for statements that are necessary to inform the public of the nature of the prosecutor's action, we have to refrain from making extrajudicial comments that might heighten public condemnation of the accused or, taint the jury pool, anything like that. So you have to be very careful of that. Obviously, if you have a juvenile case, there are rules about that confidentiality. There's the Criminal History Records Act. There's just a plethora of laws and rules that apply to this. At the same time, I think that you can be straightforward with the press and say, I understand your interest in this, but I can't respond because of this. But after the case becomes public, we'll share with you what we can, or however you need to phrase that to say, I'm accessible, but I can't be a complete open book because the parties to the case, the victims and the defense, are entitled to confidentiality. So you have to tread very carefully. Thank you.
Mr. Collison?
Very good answer, Sylvia. I consider, as district attorney, I consider my clients to be law enforcement and the public, the community in this town. However, as Sylvia mentions, we are constrained by the rules of professional conduct and witness, and to some large extent, defendant confidentiality. However, I think everything that is a matter of public record can be disclosed to the public. I would be extremely cautious about prejudicing my case. In the past, I have never spoken to the press about my cases. Now, most of the time I've been contacted as defense counsel in those cases, and a couple of times when with the Attorney General's office. I commented strictly on what was already a matter of public record, and I didn't comment beyond that. I think that the district attorney's office needs a great relationship with the press, and to be as open and candid as humanly possible within the constraints of the rules that guide our conduct.
Okay, thank you very much. It's that fraught with landmines, so thank you for being sensitive to that. And I guess we're right up almost at 8:30, so I think we will go ahead and switch into the final closing statements. We started with Ms. Hackle, so on the closing, maybe we'll start with Mr. Collison, and you have 2 minutes to You can touch on something we haven't covered yet, an extra add to a response you've made. You just have a 2 minutes to have a make your final case to the public for the voters for August 16th. So you have 2 minutes.
Very good. I don't know if I'll need the full 2 minutes. I think, again, a primary consideration is operating within the budget. I think both candidates have made a good point of following up on that. That needs to happen. I think communication with the public also is extremely important. I would have an open office for public comment, and I would operate within the constraints of what I may reveal and may not reveal. But I want to listen to the public, I want to listen to law enforcement, and I want to listen to the press. I think the district attorney's office needs to have a very good reputation in this community with all of the aforementioned. I take great emphasis in sexual offense crimes. And in addiction-related crimes, I would focus heavily on those providing the drugs in this community, on the major players and the less major players, and I would prosecute accordingly. I would like to have the healthiest office humanly possible with the district attorney. I would like full staff, competent staff. And if I had to go to the legislature and or the county commissioners and ask for more funding for that staff, I would not hesitate to do so, being ready to fully explain the needs therefore and the whys therefore. Thank you for the question and the opportunity to respond and wrap things up.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Hackle, two minutes to make your final case to the voters.
Thank you. My campaign slogan is experience, expertise, and excellence. I have a broad range of experience lasting many years in all aspects of the criminal justice system, from the smallest of misdemeanors to death penalty cases. I have the expertise to to manage, to lead, that's the important word, to lead a large law office as I have done before. And I believe in excellence, in running an office, in personal excellence, personal responsibility, and developing that excellence or pride. And I know I can knit a solid team together to bring the DA's office forward to full staff, get the caseload under control, and move forward with excellent relationships with all of those with whom we come in contact. And I look forward to the voter support on the 16th. Thank you.
And thank you to our two candidates vying in the Republican primary for district attorney.